Good morning. This is the Sunday morning room on Japanese Politics One-on-One with Timothy Langley and Maya Matsuoka. Thank you for coming. Please get your cup of tea or coffee and stay with us until the end of the room.
I think it should be important to you, but not everybody shares my views. I frequently am asked, hey, Langley, how do you know all this stuff? Are you just making this up? And the answer there is basically yes, but it is something I do for a living. And so I'm in Japanese politics. I spend time at the Diet, and people ask me to help them in the political end of things as well as the business end of things. And so finding out what's going on, if you're not really engaged, there are very, very few sources where you can join a breakfast briefing or get a newsletter, or it's incredibly difficult for people, for example, who are working in the embassy or in the diplomatic corps, getting their sources of information. Typically, when you land here and you start being introduced, you are relegated to what the foreign ministry tells you, because those are the people that are closest to you. They generally have handlers who speak your language, who grew up in your country, who went to the university in your country, who are really good, affable people. And you get your news through that source, but there's a lot more that's involved in that. So we started producing in my company a newsletter, basically twice a month. One is called Policy Radar, and the other one is a specialist newsletter about a particular topic of hot interest. And we do this about twice a month. If you're interested in that, you can go to my company's Facebook page, which is Langley Esquire on Facebook. And we have a similar page on LinkedIn, and we post these articles there. And if you want to get them via email, you just register, and you'll get them automatically. And after you're sick of reading them, there's a tag at the bottom where you can just disengage and you don't have to get them anymore. So we try and make it as easy as possible for people, but not everybody knows about it. So sorry for the shameless plug, but the fact of the matter is there are a lot of people that are interested in Japanese politics, but not very many people know how to get engaged or involved in it at a substantial level. So I hope that, our clubhouse discussion is one way, and the newsletters are another way, but sometimes it's hard to figure everything out. So this morning, I'd like to talk about 5 topics. Last week, we went through 5 topics and then opened it up for discussion. And I'd like to keep to that kind of agenda, briefly or quickly go through the 5 issues and then open it up for discussion. And then afterwards, I will provide just an update on the issues that we discussed to remind you. And then Maya post the recording of them probably that week or the next week later. So my 5 topics today are, once again, these topics come up all the time because they're hot and they're moving, and they are pretty critically important to understand what's going on and help you predict what could possibly happen in the near term. So going in kind of a cascading level of importance, I'm talking about the digital agency. We talked about that last 3 times as well. The by-elections that occurred last week. The elections were last week, and we had the results of that. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Olympics, about COVID, and about Mr. Suga and his administration. So with regard to the digital agency, you'll recall that forming the digital agency, forming a ministry or a new agency in Japan that's a huge deal. And it doesn't happen often. The last time there was an agency created was 15 years ago. And you might remember during the Koizumi administration, he actually went to coalescing ministries. So there were fewer of them, which is what we have today. And the ministers of each of the ministries serves at the cabinet. So fewer people to control makes it easier for a prime minister. So the whole push over the last 20 years since Koizumi is to squeeze the political power into the prime minister, which is not normally a power position, not like a president. He's a prime minister, so he serves as a kind of team leader. It's the power of the prime minister is a little bit dispersed, a little bit weaker than in many other democracies. And there's been a long push to coalesce this power into the house of the prime minister. So you'll notice that they have a huge complex now, which is the prime minister's. It's called the prime minister's residence. There is a house there. Very frequently does the prime minister actually live there. It was designed and built by Frank Lloyd Wright, as I think everybody knows. But they've built another structure that's 5 stories underground and 3 stories high to help with this process of bringing the power to the prime minister. And you've seen that increasingly over the last couple of years. Abe was a great example of that. The digital agency is not yet formed. It is a promise by the prime minister, Mr. Suga, when he took over. There was no mention of it even before he took over from Mr. Abe, but it caught on fire as soon as he took office. And it is now consisting of 6 bills that have already passed the lower house and are in the upper house. Those bills were supposed to have been passed about 3 weeks ago, and they went through the lower house, and now they're in the upper house. When it passes the lower house and it passes the upper house, it becomes a law. If it goes through the lower house and doesn't pass through the upper house, the lower house has another chance at it and can pass it over the opposition of the upper house. And so it's a longer process. So they're holding their feet. The opposition is holding their feet. They don't want the LDP to get their way and create this new agency, because even the prime minister has said this will be my shining moment to create this brand new agency that not only is a new agency with lots of power vested in it, but it is going to coalesce the various ministries in the way the central government talks to the various districts throughout the country, prefectural districts, even down to the cities, hamlets, and municipalities. So this is a huge deal. It won't really reach realization for maybe 5 years or so, just because of the pace of implementing the prospects there. But 6 bills are in the upper house now. One of the reasons why they are running into trouble is because if the prime minister closes down the house and says he wants to have a snap election, all bills that are under consideration evaporate. The house closes down. All of the members of the lower house go up for election. That's 465 elections. No, 465 elections, 465 seats. And all of the bills disappear. Election is held. They're given 10 days for campaigning, and then election is held on a Sunday. And then it gets back to work forming new bills. The prime minister has put so much emphasis on the new ministry that he is likely not to call a snap election. So this is their way of kind of managing the prime minister. And I think it will probably work because of everything else that's going on. Forming the digital agency is a huge deal, because what they want to do is digitize and make communications seamless and unified throughout all of the various ministries. In addition, just as a side note, there are 2 other ministries that are being considered. One is the Ministry of Caring to address the suicide issue here, and the other is the Ministry of Children, which is under consideration, probably will be more politically pushed and formed into bills in the new year, not this year, in 2022. And many people just criticize both of those efforts as election ploys to make themselves, the LDP, look good. These are both ideas that are coming out of the LDP, obviously. So that's where we are with the digital agency. And if there are any questions, we can have those before we move on to the other remaining 4 issues. Evan?
Thank you, Tim. As we're in the same room, you'll probably want to mute your mic so we don't get a feedback echo. So it's interesting, this digital agency that Japan has created, forgotten the source, I read somewhere that it was actually the world's first official digital ministry, which is interesting. And I think it's highlighting how serious the government is now treating Japan's digital transformation, which is of great importance because Japan is currently ranked 27th in the world in overall digital competitiveness, and 22nd in the world in terms of human resource competitiveness in this field. And I think it's interesting to take a little bit of a look at what this ministry is supposed to accomplish and why it's so important. Forgive me if this is covering the basics that everybody already knows, but I think it's maybe worth a think about it, because when we talk about digital transformation, I think in the Western nations that are leading in internet technologies, we tend to think of the GAFA, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, really front-end internet type technologies as being the leaders in this. But that's only part of the picture. Although the social aspect of more connectivity and the underlying infrastructure that companies like Google with their GCP, Google Cloud Platform, and Amazon with AWS, hosting platform, are the underlying backbone of this digital ecosystem, it's not the whole picture. So although Japan lags greatly behind in front-end digital competency, in the sort of intangible natures of the software that we tend to see and interact with, for these social media type of technologies, it's actually quite strong in some of the other areas. So to paint that picture in just a bit more detail, when we talk about digital transformation, where Japan is actually good, think in terms of sensors and the Internet of Things, how it's all tied together. That's an area where Japan excels. Japan is great at making lenses and sensors and little bits and pieces. The 5G technology that's coming that has so much emphasis recently in the media will help tie all of that together, interconnectivity. It's not so much about people talking to each other as machines talking to each other. So this is sort of an area where Japan will excel. So I think it's just interesting to keep in mind that it's not about the social media stuff per se. It's also about the overall infrastructure. Mike, Tim, I'll hand the mic back to you.
Thank you, Evan. So yeah, I mean, if they can't get COVID right, how in the hell are they going to be able to get something like the digital agency going is a really great question. But there are so many obvious needs that the government is initially going to go for low-hanging fruit on issues which are already kind of in mid-process. And the first one is My Number, the My Number system. It's a social security system for all Japanese. That one will be full burner. And it's had some problems, as everyone who lives in Japan knows. It kind of was launched in 2014, took off in 2016 through implementation. And it's just been, I think maybe they just didn't think it all the way through or put enough money into it. Or maybe it's an issue that they're going to have with the digital agency too. There just aren't that many technocrats that are capable of moving the country as fast forward as you might see in Israel or in Silicon Valley. So they're going to have that problem. But in any event, My Number will receive a lot of interest and a lot of money and funding. They will supplement the My Number card with biometrics and make it easy for old people to use, young people to use. And integrating that throughout the entire nation. The second low-hanging fruit that they're going to address is the use of hanko, the stamps that people stamp on documents to signify or verify their their authenticity of existence. And that will be going by the wayside, probably supplemented by the my number system. And there are lots of other ones that come to mind. One of the major hurdles that the digital agency is going to have to address, one is the system that you talked about. Everything will be in the cloud. How are they going to get the infrastructure there? They've already made a decision that they will rely on the cloud-based applications that have already been established by the monsters like Amazon, Yahoo, Google, Microsoft, because they're already there and it's hard to replicate them. In fact, before they came up with the idea of the digital agency, they tried to make their own World Wide Web in Japan. They tried very hard to do that, or maybe some sort of a cloud system, and they just gave up. It's too big. It's too hard. They're too far behind. The available technology is on the shelf. You could purchase it, and there are firewalls, so that the leakage of data, national data that is generated in Japan should be Japanese and should stay here. That's a concern I think anybody would have. But the second big issue is the cybersecurity encryption, the way to prevent leakage or theft. And they really haven't figured that out yet. A lot of energy is going into that because of the many hacking cases that are going on, and a lot of them that you never hear about or hear the news about, the ransomware, that sort of thing. And that's a very serious problem. It's going on now. I don't know if that answers or responds to some of the questions that you had, but yeah, the idea of integrating all of these various ministries who don't want to share their information. They like it the way they have it, where they have their own IP, their own internet, their own email servers. Nobody else can get that and share that is something that is very resistant among the Japanese bureaucrats. But in a country that actually numbers all of the cherry trees in the entire nation, yes, if you can manage it, the Japanese typically manage it. So I think this is just one of the processes. I just hope that the digital agency can move forward with some successes. I think the population, the Japanese population and business is hungry for something like that. You talked about 5G. The Japanese have already decided we've lost the boat on 5G. We're going to go full bore on 6G. So that's where they're putting their chips. They're going to go full bore on 6G. Let me end there and see if there are any other questions.
Yes, Timothy, this is Dan Vasquez, CEO of IntelliWings, also the former Deputy Director of Intelligence for U.S. Air Force in Japan.
Terrific. Daniel, welcome.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you letting me join this distinguished panel of speakers.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you very much. Just to touch real quick on the encryption cybersecurity that you're talking about. I've been working with a U.S. company called Phonetics that has invented an encryption key management system that can create a billion encryption keys to do identity management. And one thing that I've been seeing that's a big problem is getting Japanese companies to use this new technology. The word I've been getting from Japanese companies, from the mid-level Japanese employees, is that they understand that these new cybersecurity technologies that work with encryption are absolutely essential. In fact, it helps the Japanese companies meet all the NIST 171-800 standards that are required by the Japanese government. But the problem that the mid-level Japanese employees are having is they can't get their bosses to agree to use it. The feedback I'm getting from these Japanese companies is that the bosses don't understand it, and because they don't understand it, they don't want to use it. So what, from where you sit, what can be done to get the senior decision makers on board in Japanese government and industry?
Thank you, Daniel. I think it's actually deeper than that. I think, like with COVID, the COVID response has been very slow and meager. And one of the reasons is because the Japanese really have a huge distaste for sending money abroad and buying product to bring into Japan if the option is not available to do it here in Japan. So frequently over time, over the last 60 years or so, well, actually throughout centuries and centuries, Japan has been good about bringing into Japan things, changing it, even in insignificant ways, but changing it somehow to make it purely a Japanese product, enhancing it, and then pumping it out to the population here. And I think we see this with COVID too. The Japanese desperately want the IP and the manufacturing of the vaccines to be done here. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of slowness, that rather than purchasing the millions and millions of vials from Brussels and shipping them over here, part of that package should be some IP sharing. I think that's one of the issues. And the issue that you're touching on, with the supercomputers, I've read studies about just the incredible advances of the supercomputers, and they're getting bigger and better. Even they can crack encryption. So I'm thinking maybe blockchain, and I don't understand blockchain enough to comment authoritatively about it. But blockchain seems to hold a lot of promise in just the moving the encryption. The Japanese, if they don't solve this problem, even the Five Eyes, sharing of military information and intelligence, known as the Five Eyes, nobody really wants the Japanese to come in because the intelligence leakage here is like a sieve, especially, not only in business, but particularly in a sensitive area like military. It just happens too often. I hope that responds somewhat, Daniel.
Yes, that is a great response. I appreciate you explaining that, because we've just been having a real tough time. I've actually been over in Tokyo talking to companies, and they say, yeah, this is great, but we just don't understand it, and we're not going to use it because this is actually, it's different from blockchain, the way this encryption works, where they can, you mentioned that, yes, encryption keys can eventually be broken, but this new technology has an automated system to actually keep changing the encryption keys anytime it detects someone poking around where they're not supposed to. So even if you do have a fast computer to try to break it, they'll change the key immediately. So the breaking won't work.
But that means that the people who are watching that and guiding that are probably not Japanese. It's housed somewhere else, and that's probably the core of the distaste for it.
Well, no, this can actually be given, well, not given, sold to a Japanese company or government agency, so they can handle the keys. The company Phonetics that creates this, they don't have any access to those keys. It's whoever owns the system that sits on the keys. So, once a Japanese company or a government agency takes it over, then no one else can get into it, and the keys are changed automatically on schedule or randomly, or if the system detects any kind of poking around that shouldn't be happening.
Okay, we need to move on. I've got 4 other issues that I want to talk about. But listen, we've got Evan. Evan wants to say something. We have the chief conspiratorial analyst Hayato, who just signed on. I'm sure he's got something to say here. And Gary just came on. So let me open the discussion and try and wrap this up as quickly as possible.
One quick point. The solution to this digital competency, I think, is education. So we'll all remember the former, cybersecurity minister Yoshitaka Sakurada, who himself did not use a computer, never had used a computer. So there's a huge gap. Currently, it's been identified that there is a lack of about 300,000 engineers who are versed in this area. And by 2025, as we reach what's called the digital cliff, that will increase to almost 500,000. So this is the key problem. We need to re-educate engineers, move people who've been versed in manufacturing engineering into more the digital sphere of things.
Thank you. Hayato in the house.
Oh, yeah, hi. Can I add to the Daniel? Because I've been going through the same thing, like he just mentioned, for last 20, 30 years, right? But it's like this, like the U.S. and Japan also have a set of this lobbyists lobbying behind, right? So so whenever you have a great technology from the U.S., that'll be absolutely better than anything out there. But there are always guys like NEC, Toshiba, and those guys, Mitsubishi. They kind of wanted to lobby against you on anything better because they're going to lose money. And those guys are really, I'm telling you, they are really dumb in technology, but they're very smart in the politics. Yeah, so it's just anything that you need to kind of, you have anything great to just get through. Yeah, just shoot at me, and I'm going to squeeze those guys out, right? It's very straightforward. Yeah, do this in the US and do it in Japan, right? No big deal.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I hesitated to say something because it's my line of business, but you've got to lobby the government. You have to have a strategy, and you have to know who you're talking to, and you have to have some money behind it, not to put into a briefcase, but to spend otherwise. Gary, did you want to say something?
I wanted to apologize. I had a phone call, long distance phone call, and I had to step away, so I missed a lot of the conversation. So forgive me if I just listen for a while.
Okay, no, we're going to hit your issue later on, but I saw you just came on, so thank you. Tomoko-san, good morning.
Good morning. Regarding the IT issues, I've done the marketing research last year about cloud business for SME in Japan, actually, and I had a discussion with my client. My client is a research company, and we concluded that those people who seems to understand IT means they know how to use PC at SME, and those people who can. I'm really strongly agree with Evans that we need to educate people to know how to use PC and good at using PC to more upgraded to use DX, for instance. And also we need to think about those people who understand IT very well tend to be employed by GAFA in Japan as well. So it's really important to think about utilize those people who already know about PCs and have good grasp of the internet issues to upgrade, as well as those who already know how to very good at business, for instance, to be employed or to be an agent for SMEs. Otherwise, it's really hard for SMEs to upgrade their IT standard.
Absolutely right. If you look at Rakuten or Google, I mean, they are predominantly, not majority, but they're predominantly staffed by foreign technocrats who have moved to Japan or have developed that skill here while they've been in Japan. But yeah, there is a real dearth of people. Probably one of the smartest things is for these major companies to come together and launch a university of internet technology or something like that to kind of ingratiate themselves to Japanese politicians. Make sure that the university is set in, some maybe Motegi's district, so that you get a little bit of a political pull there. If there's nothing else, I'd like to move on to the by-elections of last week. Okay, thank you. So there were 3 elections last week. The LDP lost. Well, we knew that they were going to lose in at least one of them in Hokkaido because they didn't even have a candidate that was running. They did support a Komeito candidate, but they didn't come out on top. So 3 for 3 they lost, and that means Mr. Suga lost. And it was important because there probably is not going to be another barometer of how the opposition parties are lining up against the LDP when the election finally does start. And within the next 5 months, there would be a House of Representatives election. And it looks like that will run the course until October 25th. That will be the end of the 4-year term. Very rare to happen in Japanese politics that the 4-year term of the House of Representatives actually goes to the limit. So the fact that the Prime Minister did not do very well, and more importantly, that Mr. Kishida, who was former foreign minister, you would think he would have some pull. He's been struggling to establish more political clout within the LDP. And the Hiroshima election was in his district. You might remember that he placed his name up for candidate of prime minister. So he is a prominent individual. It's just that he can't win elections even in his own district. So people who might vote for him as a candidate, they need to consider the fact that he would be, as prime minister, popular and able to win votes. And the fact that the LDP did not do very good, and the fact that Hiroshima was in his district and he wasn't able to bring home the bacon, doesn't reflect positively on him. And this next election is going to be an incredibly tough one. The last 3 elections we had were under Mr. Abe. And you might remember that there are a lot of, you remember when Koizumi was prime minister, he was popular, a lot of flair. And he generated Koizumi children who became first-year members of the lower house during his term. Mr. Abe had the same situation. He had more than 107 new members come in who are new members based on his endorsement, based on his leadership. And you don't have a person of that quality or of that charisma this time. It is, and number one, it's very difficult for these children of Mr. Abe who's never had a very tough fight to come in and win in a tough fight, which this next election is going to be. So the interesting part about the 3 by-elections last week was the revealing of how the Constitutional Democratic Party is going to work with other opposition parties to split the vote and to give the LDP a run for the money. So the prediction is there's also another fight between Komeito, who is the coalition partner for the LDP. They had a couple of snafus in this last election cycle, and those snafus will be exploited by the opposition party. So guaranteed the opposition is going to come up racing when this next election is called. There's been some feints and some threats going back and forth between the various coalitions, the various opposition parties and the LDP. We're going to, put together a vote of no confidence so that you have to close down the House. And Mr. Nikai threatening, we'll close down, we'll have a snap election and kick your ass. And there's been a lot of saber rattling there. But I think under the general circumstance, that's not going to happen. You will see the members of the lower house going all the way to the end of their term, and then there will be an election. The prime minister is not going to call a snap election. He just doesn't have the time. You've got the Tokyo metropolitan elections on July 4th. You've got the Olympics starting on July 23rd, and very closely thereafter, you've got the Paralympics on September 5th. There's just not a lot of time, and there's not enough of a wind giving the current prime minister any breeze to give him the confidence to do anything. In contrast to that, actually, you've got bad news that is bolstering. COVID is not going very well. I'm going to talk about that later. The release of the nuclear waste from Fukushima is in the news. And the Prime Minister promised, you know, this, I'm not going to call a third state of emergency. We're going to get through this one. And he kind of had to fall on his sword this last week. So things are not looking good for this Prime Minister. Anyway, that's it for the by-elections. I'd like to close there now and see if there are any questions, and then move on to the last remaining, which would be the Olympics, COVID, and Mr. Suga.
Hello, Mr. I'm sorry, I can't see the mod's names. This is Sakura. May I ask a question regarding immigrations and Japanese politics in relation to the new prime minister, and you know how the laws may change, may or may not change?
Okay, Sakura-san, with a cat.
Oh yeah, sorry, that's Koyuki, the grumpy cat in Japan.
Okay.
I'm a big fan. That's why I had to photo up.
Okay. Can we leave the immigration to the major discussion, because your question doesn't have anything to do with the by-elections?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Please stick around. There's plenty more to go. If there's nothing else,
on the
Dylan, thank you.
Part of a great room always, and everyone give Daniel a quick follow. On the by-elections, what was the snafu that Komeito took on, and who do you see as the next coalition from the opposition party to kind of separate this and bring that election out of the LDP hands, the LDP's hands?
That's interesting. I don't know if you're asking evilly because you know what the answer is, or if you're just kind of teasing me to make me show off. So the snafu in Hiroshima, the LDP has a coalition with Komeito, and the LDP pretty much knew that they're in trouble in Hiroshima, because the reason why the seat is open was because of a bribery scandal with the upper house member there, and in fact her husband too. So they knew that they're in trouble there, but it's too important to just relinquish like they did in Hokkaido. In Hokkaido, the former Minister of Agriculture was the representative there. He was charged in bribery with an egg producer, and he left the seat. He resigned, and to fill that seat, they had the election. That was so bad that the LDP didn't even run a candidate there. In Hiroshima, it's more important because, number one, it's Mr. Kishida's region. He's in charge of that. But also, if we can horse trade with Komeito, and Komeito, you give your votes to us. You vote for our candidate in Hiroshima. And when the general election comes, we're going to vote for your candidate. The LDP won't run. We'll put our votes and we'll tell our LDP members, vote for Komeito on this seat. And it was the candidate would be one of the chief major mucky mucks within Komeito. So it was pretty big. So there was horse trading there. So LDP convinces Komeito, please vote for our candidate in Hiroshima because we're having trouble. And in exchange for that, we will vote for your guy when the next election comes up. It'll be in the next 5 months. So there's a lot of horse trading going on there. So the LDP in Tokyo told Hiroshima, this is the deal that we're going to do. And so make sure that the Komeito and LDP, we have this vote sharing arrangement in this election. It not only did it not work, but the LDP in Tokyo and the LDP in Hiroshima were fighting about the selection of the candidate. They didn't like that. So they say, the LDP members in Hiroshima, they say, well, the Komeito, they promised, but they were really lackluster. We could have won if they had been a little bit more enthusiastic, and they weren't, and we lost. So I don't know if we're going to vote for this guy come the election. That's the snafu. So these promises, even sometimes they don't bear fruit. It's important to still fulfill those promises. And so that's a crack in the seal that binds Komeito and the LDP together. So there's going to be I think a real ass kicking if the LDP loses the cohesion with Komeito in this next election, that will be disastrous for the LDP. And I
think that leads directly into, so who would, if this is that crack in the shell, who does Komeito look to next to build their next alliance?
Yeah, so the largest opposition party is the Constitutional Democratic Party. They have about, in the lower house, they have about 113 seats versus 278 with the LDP. And the Komeito has about 50 seats to give the LDP that coalition advantage. I don't know if Komeito, Komeito is a great bloc. It's they vote as a cohesive team. They're very regimented. They're far more regimented and more disciplined than the LDP because the underlying bond is a religious kind of webbing that connects most of the people together. People don't like to talk about that, and it's not.
I'll tell you what, and I'm well connected with the Komeito and the Sukurakai. I was always afraid of them until I got into finding out who they are. And in general, in Japan, people treat them as the outsiders. Inside that group, you are right. They vote as a bloc. They're very open and sharing. It's an interesting dynamic that I still don't understand. I'd love for you to talk about that some.
Somebody asked me this the last time, and I once again I apologize for the shameless plug, but we did a focus on that on Tokyo on Fire about a year and a half ago. Michael Chuchek and I sat down, and we talked about the Komeito and the LDP at some length. But before we started it, we were reticent to actually go into it. It's like talking about the Moonies or about the Hell's Angels. They do have guards that protect their image, and if you're stepping or like some of these political groups, they do have people that protect them, and if you raise your head and become something of a naysayer or a critic, yeah, you get phone calls and you get visits, and things are made very, very difficult for you. In any event, even with that, we did a pretty deep dive on Komeito, and you can find it on Tokyo on Fire.
Thank you. May I have a question then? I wonder.
Sure, it's your room.
Thank you. Okay, so you mentioned that there is a lot of uncertainty with all the lower house members who have never actually been in tough fights for the power and before elections. And also, now Dylan mentioned about, Komeito and, there is some tension there between Komeito and LDP. So I just wonder, does this uncertainty mean that at some point, in autumn anyway, we might see a change in the power balance, so that we might see even a change of the leading party here in Japan?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I don't, the LDP holds a super majority in the upper house. That means it has almost 66 and a third % in the upper house, a super majority. It has a majority in the lower. It has a majority in both houses, and it has a majority in the lower house, not a super majority. And the reason why those two issues are important is because to change the Constitution, you need 2/3 to change the Constitution. And that was always Mr. Abe's drive. And this point, this part of the 2/3 supermajority is very important when we talk about Mr. Suga and his standing. So yes, we're going to talk about that. But it is unlikely that the LDP would lose the 50% of its membership. But you never know. Between now and then, there could be something that happens. For example, the Olympics just turns out to be not an utter failure, but they just waited too long and then they canceled the Olympics. And that looks like a black eye. It's just one thing after another that the prime minister can't do anything right. And certainly there'll be a change of prime minister. It could mean that there's a change of the party in leadership, or maybe even a negotiated prime minister interim.
Thank you. And so last week you mentioned that Mr. Abe might be a possible candidate again for prime minister. Well, is there any change in that? I mean, because there must have been some developments this week as well. So if you have any insights, I would like to hear them.
But you're jumping the gun. You're jumping the gun.
Sorry. Okay.
A little bit early.
All right then. Thank you.
Yeah, there's some juiciness there. So let me get to it when I talk about Mr. Suga's situation. Anybody else? Sorry to cut you off like that, Maya, but
well, please go ahead. No problem at all.
Thank you.
Timothy, I have a question.
And by the way, Maya, just a minute, Gary. Maya, I didn't notice that the recording button is on for this room.
Yes, it is. Yes, the room is being recorded.
Go ahead, Gary.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm on the outside looking in. Over the years, I've worked with bureaucrats from many, many different ministries. And the common theme that I heard from them was that politicians come, politicians go, but bureaucrats are here forever. They're the ones that really control the government and determine the direction of the government. And I'm wondering, and like I said, this might seem to be naive, but I'm wondering just how important are these elections if the bureaucrats are the ones that really have the power? Timothy?
Yes, I just had my muting on. Sorry. So that's the fight that's been going on ever since Koizumi. And since you came here with Commodore Perry, Gary, you're very you're very familiar with what the old school was, that the bureaucrats really controlled things. And the enormous push ever since Koizumi has been to wrestle that away from them and to move it into the lower house in particular, but into the upper house and more particularly into the prime minister. They've been very successful in doing that. The major achievement is in the appointment of the bureaucrats going down several layers, rests with the office of prime minister. So if you want to be a good boy and you want to protect your career as a bureaucrat, you have to be doing a lot of ass kissing by, doing what the powers that be want you to do. So that erosion of the bureaucratic power has been long going. So people who are really concerned about, like what Daniel was talking about, how do I gain influence? How do I get somebody to listen to me? How do I get these old foggy guys to pay attention? And it is through the lower house and through the upper house, and eventually through the prime minister, through the cabinet. That's the most direct route, the most sure way to go. Going through the bureaucrats, it takes a long, long time, and gaining influence there is very difficult. It's they're very protected, they're very covetous. They building inroads there is very difficult. Whereas with the politicians, it's welcome and it's a lot easier.
Thank you for that.
Timothy, if you allow me just to chime in and to reset the room. So this is the weekly room on Japanese politics. The conversation is being recorded. I'm sorry, the button doesn't seem to show up here, but yes, the conversation has been recorded since the beginning. And after we finish it, it will be uploaded on the Japan Expert Insights website. You can find it in my profile. So if you need to sign off, you can do it safely and listen to the rest of the conversation later. So thank you very much. Timothy, please go ahead.
Thank you. Let me blast through the next three, the Olympics, COVID, and Suga. I'd like to spend more time on Mr. Suga as I can. And our room will go a little bit long because I'd like to open it up for Q&A afterwards. And Sakura has something that she wants to talk about. And also Gary had an issue he brought up last week we haven't addressed yet. So the Olympics, they are on the boards. Nobody wants them. 80% of the Japanese population says either no or I'm not interested. 80%, and that's very high. It is possible that they do pull out. The Japanese government, if you're reading the press, says, we'd like to, but the International Olympic Committee, they just won't let us, and that is totally backwards. So they're looking for some way to actually justify them holding the Olympics, and it's one of those things that the LDP has been criticized for decades. It's money in politics. And, this Olympics is no different. A lot of the big players, Dentsu, all of the Olympic sponsors, they have a vested interest in the Olympics going one way or the other. And it could be, we're in the middle of another state of emergency. It's only going until May 5th. It's going to be extended. You can't even tell the results of how effective your lockdown, not your lockdown, but your state of emergency has been in such a brief period of time. So we can look forward to it being extended. And at that time, maybe there will be a call that the Olympics are just going to be pulled off. But we've got, precious little time. We've got the Tokyo Olympics that are coming up 2 weeks before the Tokyo elections, 2 weeks before the Olympics gets kicked off. So there's a lot going on in the background. It is still up in the air if the Olympics will be held or not. I would guess that, damn the torpedoes, we're still going to do it. We don't care if there are no spectators. We're going to do it in any event. One idea that I heard that had some appeal to me was, let's hold the Olympics on at the same date next year, and just convince the Chinese to do their Winter Olympics in 2023, which sounded kind of nice to me, but I'm sure the Chinese would have a completely different view. But that would be a kind of a nice, duck and cover for the Olympics. So that's it for the Olympics. I'd like to open the room for questions or comments.
I read an article mentioning that Koike Yuriko is thinking to ask for postpone or cancel the Olympics, and she was thinking to write on her proposal manifest for her candidates for the next election.
Excellent point.
I mean, I just read an article, so I'm not really quite sure.
Okay, so there's a long-standing fight between Koike and the LDP, the central government. Tokyo is the host of the Olympics, the hosting city, but the Japanese government is also a sponsor and paying for a lot of the buildings. So there is a fight going on there. So that's why her comments are a bit muted. She doesn't have full authority. She can sway that decision. And I think probably it's more the big corporations that are holding the prime minister and the minister of the Olympics pretty much at bay. We're going to lose money either way, but we're going to lose less money this way, I think, is the calculus that's going on. But you can see that the governor, Koike, she wants to say more, but she's hesitant to say more. She's very guarded. And I think if she made the manifesto for what is it? She mean first, Tokyo first, her party to not Tomin first. Thank you, Dylan. Tomin first. That would be a powerful signal. That would be kind of like, putting your dukes up to the national government. And if she did, and if that resonated with Tokyo, and that led to them pulling out of the Olympics, now you've got a real horse race. Tomin first dominating Tokyo politics and perhaps bleeding into national politics as well. Pretty exciting stuff.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Moving on to COVID?
Actually, this might be a good prelude into COVID because it's directly connected to the Olympics and the concerns.
Yes,
I've seen research and development, business, science are equal to on the world stage for quick, precise understanding, application, and inventiveness, and in Japan, and pioneering ideas and prototypes and discoveries. And it astounds me how slow the government has been in responding to COVID, and as well as dealing with the Olympics. And it would seem that they're almost shooting themselves in the foot by being so slow with the rollout of the vaccines, which in turn is going to have an immediate impact on the Olympics. And the world is scratching their heads saying, what's going on in Japan? So any comments or perspectives on that are more than welcome.
yes. Let's roll into the COVID discussion. Anybody want to weigh in as we do that?
All right, very quickly, right? Yeah, I'm just, this Hayato, I'm just sharing, what I shared with you last week, which is pretty much, this whole effort and the immunization has been sabotaged in Japan by those, Ministry of Health, and also the Japanese companies, who kind of need to make money, So they, right now, I guess their immunization rate maybe 0.6% to 0.9%, right? And those things may speed up. But once the Takeda and there's other guys who get their immunization, the vaccine approved, right? Yeah, so it's, because of this, as you know, if you're in the bureaucracy as Minister of Health, you won't have any employment or future, right, if you don't work for Takeda now, right? So now is the opportunity to shine, which is to just slow down the Pfizer vaccine, right? Yeah,
Yep.
So that they can make money in the future. That's it, right? There's nothing more, nothing less. Very simple. Everything's for money.
Yes.
I'm done talking.
Thank you, Hayato. Yeah, I think there's a lot of weight to what it is that you say. Less than 1% vaccination. I mean, that's pretty ridiculous. But there is an explanation for it, a logical explanation. It's just being covered by lots of other issues. It doesn't look good for Konotaro, who is the czar of vaccination rollout. He was the shining star that was put in charge and probably the most likely candidate for prime minister, or a candidate for prime minister, when that job comes open in September. So it does look an awful lot like, maybe sabotage, or it's just, somebody is withholding. But we've seen this in the past. We've seen that, lots of people can be sacrificed for the good of, maybe the party or for the big corporations that really wield tremendous political power. I think probably we're not going to know that answer for several years afterwards, but it is a head scratcher.
Yeah, and like I showed you last week, I have a discussion analysis with a personal friend of mine who is the head of the government affairs with the SoftBank, right? And he 100% agree, or he can get back to me right away. That's the way it is, right? And that's what's going on. And he has 50 people working to analyze all this thing.
I'd like to read his newsletter.
Yeah. He won't publish it, but he knows. Not talking.
Thank you. Emma, you joined. Did you want to say something before we move into our last segment today?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I was just wondering, it's just that I feel like it's so ridiculous that we're not being vaccinated in Japan. But I heard that they were inviting only Japanese people to the Olympic to watch the actual Olympics there, like physically be there. But if we're not being vaccinated, then how can that be happening? I just don't get the. I feel like we need to be vaccinated before that to be, happening. So.
Yeah, the trajectory does not look very good. I think the way that they've designed it so far is that it will be a spectatorless Olympics, if they hold the Olympics at all. That's the coin toss that we're confronting now. So probably the decision will be made. I predict that this current state of emergency will go to May 5th, as it is already announced to be. It won't be enough. There will be, reports of various strains taking hold, and a new panic coming in, and a new state of emergency. And as a consequence of that, a decision will be made about the Olympics, that they waited too long, and they need to do something about it. And that will reflect on the Tokyo elections, which is very, very close, and then the national elections as well. So there's all, it's really important to stay tuned. Rooms like this one are few and far between, but it's moving every week. So I really appreciate people sticking to the room. Thank you.
I have a question. Would you be kind enough to share your views on the idea that most of the Japanese public is disappointed with the COVID vaccine rollout? I've read that it's up to 80%. Again, I feel like I'm on the outside looking in, and I appreciate any comments on that.
No, you're right. Let's talk about Mr. Suga, because all of this kind of, and I've left Mr. Suga to the end. This is the most important part of our discussion today. What's going on with Mr. Suga? How is he spending his time? How is he perceived? What is his next move? What is his, looking at the way the field is set, what options does he have? What's the most likelihood outcome? Because, the reason why we follow this is to hopefully better predict and advise our companies and the people that pay us money for doing what we do more astutely about what is the most likely outcome for business purposes. So this is incredibly important. What the Prime Minister is doing and how he's perceived is incredibly important for us to understand that. So with that, let's the last a poll on him put him at about 44%. It's not as high as 66.4% when he was first anointed as the Prime Minister. He wasn't elected. He took over the remaining term of Mr. Abe when he resigned. So he's surviving on the tail end of Mr. Abe's term, and he came with pretty high marks. 66% is pretty good. I think a lot of that is because people were just relieved Mr. Abe was gone, and the other part was that he had been the longest chief cabinet secretary in Japanese history, from 2012 to 2020, both in December actually. So it was hoped that he would be popular, and as an administrator he would be able to fix things so that things move smoothly. He's the next opinion poll won't come out for another 2 weeks, but it is likely to be dipping. He's got a lot of things going against him. For example, what we were just talking about, the COVID rollout. With less than 1%, far less than 1% being vaccinated, the trajectory, even if they have enough nurses, even if they decide a doctor doesn't need to be in the room, we can have dentists doing this. They still haven't figured this one out. To open up, convention centers or sports stadiums to inoculate people in time for the potentially for sitting in the stadium of the Olympics, it just doesn't move that quickly. And in this country, it certainly faces other challenges, which once again reflects on our first issue of today, which is the digital agency, which is a huge undertaking. What is the likelihood of that being successful in light of COVID, which actually means lives, saving lives, to be at this pace. So there's a lot to be concerned about. There's a lot of, consternation about, how come a country that is managed by such skillful, technicians and bureaucrats, these are the cream of the crop. In Japan, the people who are at the highest of their graduating class, they aspire to join the government. So it's managed and it's worked by people of very high caliber. And so the consternation is, why, with that level of technical excellence, do they still just screw up? And it sounds rude to say that, but this is how is this actually possible in this kind of a working democracy? And a lot of it is because the way the government is set up, and the prime minister, who is not really the top of the pyramid in way things are decided, but it is being structured that way. So how the prime minister is doing, and how he's putting his pieces in place, and who he elects as, or who he appoints as his cabinet, is very important, and that's why it's closely watched. One of the other things, as I said earlier, the chief tool that the prime minister has is his ability to close down the House at any time of his choosing. That tool is probably not in his tool bag anymore. He's got the Tokyo Olympics coming up, that he promised the Tokyo metropolitan government that he wouldn't hold a snap election 2 months before and 2 months after that particular election. So that date is quickly approaching. There's nothing good on the horizon. They've just announced they will be releasing, in 2 years' time, granted, but they will be releasing the wastewater from Fukushima. The newest thing, so we talked earlier about if there is a bill under consideration in the parliament, and there is an election, there's a snap election, or the prime minister dies, or there's a no confidence, all of those bills evaporate. So right now, it could be that the LDP has its strongest position. It doesn't have 2/3 in both houses, but it has a strong position right now before this new election comes up. Let's take a gamble and let's push through this referendum for harmonization of the Referendum Act and the election bills. So this is a Mr. Abe initiative. As you remember, one of the things he wanted to do was change Article 9. He's been dedicated to that. He's written books about that. It is, he feels, his destiny to change that, to make Japan a stronger country militarily. So he is now, we talked about this just very briefly in our last session last week. He has put himself as the head of the Constitutional Revision Committee. He did that last week. And this week it was announced that the government is going to push through this bill that is the first step to reforming the Constitution, to have a referendum. So passing a bill, the bill depends on a referendum of the Japanese people. 2/3 needs to vote on that. And then it comes back to the parliament. And if it wins by 2/3 in both houses, it becomes law. So what they've decided is, we're going to do that. We're going to push that through, to hell with the opposition. Let's go for it. So that's coming up. That bill will be submitted this week. So this is something that you need to watch very carefully. Mr. Abe is behind it and driving it. If it goes through, it's a feather in his cap, and the likelihood of him, coming back for a third time is much more likely. I think Maya was asking about that. How realistic is that? It is probably one of the most plausible outcomes, given that Mr. Suga is continuing to do very poorly. Who is in the wings to take over? There's Konotaro, there's Mr. Kishida, who is basically no longer in consideration. It could be Motegi, it could be a couple of other people. But right now, the front runner is Konotaro, even though the vaccine rollout is not looking as sterling as it should. Mr. Abe coming out of the background to say, yes, I'm going to do it again. And thank you for voting for the referendum. Let's change Article 9. It could work. But anyway, I don't see the prime minister calling a snap election. he just doesn't have anything in place. And you might remember that since the LDP was formed, since the Japanese government was formed after the end of the war, there have been 25 elections for the lower house, 25 of those. And only one has gone the full distance, 4 years. That means for 24 elections since the post-war era, every House of Representatives 4-year term has been cut short because of a vote of no confidence, because of a closure of the House, or the death of the Prime Minister, that sort of thing. And more worrisome is that the election that went closest to the 4-year term and then called in the September timeframe was that by the current Vice Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Taro Aso. That was his administration when he was Prime Minister. And the LDP lost so bad that actually a new Prime Minister came in and a new party came in, just as you were asking about Tomoko. Is it possible that there could be this change of government? And that's exactly the dynamic that happened when Taro Aso was Prime Minister. So the kind of historically, when you're taking a look at the analytics of it, this has happened before. The later that you run the election to the 4-year term, the worse it is for the LDP. And that's happened only once with Aso Taro, and it just, the dynamics, the atmospherics just don't look very good. So it's, you know, we will watch the tea leaves, and you should be watching them very carefully too, to see if there's going to be a continuation with Suga. So he's, to his credit, you know, he went to the United States. He and Biden had a lot of discussions. Probably not he and Biden, but you know, the administration. They'd been talking about a lot of different things. One of the important things they did talk about was the environment. So Biden is hot on the environment. He's putting a lot of money into it. And the Prime Minister also made his commitment to go green and to reduce the carbon footprint by 2030. So you might remember have seen that last week. One of the other things that hasn't been reported very widely, but it's now beginning to take a lot of traction, is a coalition for semiconductors. The EU, the United States, and Japan. Let's form this coalition of producing chips and condensers. Let's get away from the supply chain that we've relegated to China for production. Most of the machines are made in Japan. In any event, let's bring it back home. And so there's a big push to that. There's another huge 5 billion yen reinvigoration financing that the Japanese government is announcing. Motegi is on his way to, or he's already there in the UK now. So this is bolstering, you know, the Japanese government is doing something. It's moving abroad. And you might remember, this is my last comment, but you might remember when prime ministers get into trouble or presidents get into trouble because of domestic politics. It happens all the time. It's a good trick. They always go overseas. They always rely on foreign policy to bolster their image. And that's what's going on right now. It's a good trick because you can score points there. Few people are really that well versed in what's going on with foreign affairs. So advances and you know, pictures with leaders of the state and that sort of thing, it always makes good press. So there's building of momentum that you'll continue to see, just to stop the outflow of just negative news that are coming out. And with that, I'd like to close my comments and open the room.
Timothy, would you comment on Abe's health? Supposedly the reason why he stepped down.
So the reason why he stepped down, he did have health issues. He was weak at meetings. He had to get up and go to the bathroom. He was actually looking pale and peaked. I don't know what has happened in the interim, but you know, it is a tough job. Immediately after he resigned, and Mr. Suga took over, it wasn't 2 weeks before I started seeing him at various Benkyokai, Hagimaskai, and that sort of thing. And he looked great. He looked, warm and gregarious. So maybe he's got a handle on it. But he's a driven person. He wants to be a historical figure. He is a historical figure already, but he is driven to achieve things, and maybe at the cost of his health and potentially his life. I mean, he's still young. He's 68 years old. He still has some good mileage on him. Maybe he just needs to boss people around more and spend more time, on the golf course, or not as tied up. But as a figurehead of the state, I think it's a very likely and very attractive option. I think he's going to go for it.
Oh, hi, can I ask? Hello?
Yes, hello, please
Oh,
go
okay,
ahead.
sure.
Yes.
Okay, so the kind of health practitioner that saw him 2 days before his resignation, told me that there's no issue. And when we check with the chief secretary for the Abe, there's no health issue. So this is the whole thing is that Mr. Abe has a Crohn's disease, that is forced him to resign the first time. But for this time, he has been fine. And as you know, like Timothy updated, Mr. Abe has been partying, all the time in social circle. So there's no issue, and he's eating normally. So so it's a whole thing is just a good excuse for him to take a little bit break,
I think so too. I think, there's a lot of things on the horizon. He saw them coming, the Olympics, COVID, the nuclear wastewater. Let's dump it on a patsy. Let's take a break and let's come back strong later. It makes sense to me.
Yeah, and also after the Timothy's previous comment, that last 2 weeks ago, that Mr. Abe kind of launched the efforts for the fundraise for the next prime ministership. So it's going to happen. Right? Yeah, when you start collecting money, it's real. So that's
right.
Right. I'm done talking.
Thank you, Hayato. Anyone else?
Can I hi, Timothy and Maya.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for this very interesting and insightful discussion. So I just wanted to ask, everything I've been hearing so far on Japanese politics has been quite depressing, because I feel like I just don't see politics working for people. But at the same time, I do understand that things sort of have to hit the worst before they bounce back or improve. So in your opinion, Timothy, do you feel that this is sort of the lowest point in the history of Japanese politics? I mean, can it be any lower than this? And if that's the case, in your opinion, can we see this as an opportunity for positive and real changes in Japanese politics?
That's a great question, and it reflects a little bit on what Dylan was saying earlier. So Komeito is known as the party of the people, and they do promote and champion women, the unemployed, children. They are held as the standard bearer for promoting welfare, and so they're a good coalition partner for the LDP, which is seen as money grubbing and power politics and that sort of thing. A low point, I don't know. There have been many famous low points. There's no huge scandal. So if there was a huge scandal that was bubbling right now, which implicated maybe the prime minister or a couple of people in the cabinet, I think it would change my answer significantly. The COVID reaction is pretty bad and getting a lot of worldwide attention. The Olympics being here, held, not held, that is a negative inflection as well. But yeah, I think it's been worse in other parts of recent Japanese history. A lot can be expected within the next 4 or 5 months, though, to keep them tuned.
Okay. Thank you.
So anybody who is listening at the moment, if you would like to have a question or to share your opinion, please raise your hand and let us bring you up stage.
Yeah, although I try and sound like I got all the answers and I know how it all works, that's not accurate. So everybody has a view. Everybody's got their own personal experiences, and like Hayato said, he's got somebody that's directly, observing the prime minister. So every input helps. So if you have any insight or if you want to share something, now's a good time.
Hi. Let me add to the Timothy's previous comment, right? Yeah. So I don't know if there's such a new brightness, that we can expect in any near future, because if somebody is right, and the person won't have the opportunity, somehow the scandal come up and they're gonna get pushed out of politics. That's the way it is. The last, the only shining example was Tanaka Kaku, right? Kaku Tanaka. That was 1970s, 80s. He was the superstar politics in the Japanese history, and probably the only one, right? But then he got caught in the scandals by was it Boeing or McDonnell Douglas, and he kind of stepped down. But that's the way it is, right? Because there are a lot of monies, a lot of policies, a lot of powers at stake. So nobody's going to let anybody, play on a shiny star. Right? Yeah, that's my view.
That's frequently made as the best excuse for why I need to stay as the prime minister, because there's nobody else out there that kind of compares to me. That's been said time and time again. When Koizumi was made prime minister, they said the same thing about him. He was weak, he was indecisive, but he actually turned out to be a very significant prime minister and still continues to hold a lot of weight and power. Kaku Tanaka was just scary. He was so powerful, and he knew how to do things. He never finished high school. He was just a rock solid, knuckle fighting politician. He knew how to get things done. But I don't think it was a shining example. They got the Olympics and they got the highways and all of the infrastructure built, but it was a lot of dirtiness there too. So a lot of that is not characteristic of what you're reading about, although probably it still goes on to a large degree. It's just kept very quiet and under good wraps. But money in politics, that's how you get things done. Not just here. It's not a negative comment towards Japan. It's a general assessment of how politics work.
Timothy, can I ask you another question?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So I've been away from Japan for a long time, so I don't really
missed you.
Sorry. Yes. So I don't really know how things are in Japan now in terms of politics. So do you think that the current situation in Japanese politics is making people more indifferent towards politics, or do you feel that it is actually making people more interested and making them feel that they want to make changes in politics, especially I guess among young people?
Yeah, I think my gut reaction is that it just makes people more docile. It makes them more resigned to, there's nothing that can be done. It's these guys that wear loud suits, the old guys who are basically controlling things. They don't even care about what we're doing, what's happening to people. But contrast that with Komeito and the influence of Komeito. So this next election will be really important for Komeito. Watch the Tokyo metropolitan government. Tomin first is a huge issue. The Tomin first, it means it's kind of like what Donald Trump was saying. America first. Tomin first is let's do what's right for the people of Tokyo. The various. It's a metropolitan. It's huge. What Tokyo comprises, it's the third. Of Japan being the third largest economy in the world. The vast majority of that wealth and that power and that determination is focused in Tokyo. So Tokyo holds a lot of sway in not just how politics is done, but also how Japanese perceive themselves and how they project themselves. So yeah, it could be something of a turning point that people are just so sick of it that we've got all of this machinery, but the decisions just take too long to get implemented. Let's do something to change it. There could be that turning point. I don't know if it's this election. A lot will happen as a consequence of who becomes prime minister. So if Kono Taro becomes, I'm sorry, this is just a bit of a deflection, but if Kono Taro becomes prime minister, he is already known as a bit of a maverick. One of the reasons why he doesn't have a lot of popularity within the LDP and why some people withhold, a lot of support for him is because he's a bit of a maverick. He's pretty young. He was educated in the United States. He comes from a political heritage. His father was the Speaker of the House, so very prominent. If he comes into power, there's a lot that he could do to just crush the fabric of what has been in the past, because he's opposed to it too. So he could be a dynamic agent of change. But first of all, he just has to get elected first. So you've seen him awful quiet. He's not talking too much about his anti-nuclear stance. He is talking a little bit about let's get rid of faxes, let's change Hanko, which is part of the digital agency agenda as well. So he's being very quiet. Until he becomes prime minister, you won't see the true Kono Taro, I believe.
Can I make 2 comments?
Please.
Those 2 are actually related to Sakura-san's question. One is, I think the outcome right now we have now is just the biggest cause of the administration by Koizumi era. Because Koizumi shuffled their ministries a lot, and also he cut huge budget cut from them for healthcare and welfare, actually. And as a result, we have the issue right now. And just because we have so much issues about the healthcare and welfare system, people start talking about Japanese CDC should be in place. And also we need to think about the clinical trial system to be revised and so on, so on. So this is maybe not the last time, but it gets better because people start seriously talking about things needs to be changed. And the younger generations, they've been establishing their own entrepreneurship. Nothing related to politicians. They are not thinking about the pressurizing them, the politicians making noise to them or asking them for favor, but they are doing by themselves, among themselves, making networks among themselves. So young generation is changing tremendously, although I don't know how much they can do, they can go for, but things is changing. I just hope everything gets better, not next year, this year or next year, but gradually things is getting better. That's my belief. I'm done talking.
Okay, I think just in response to that, the younger generation is politically, they're just not interested in Japanese politics. It's not cool. It doesn't mean anything to me. Why should I get involved in it? And one of the things people frequently say is, if you don't like it, why don't you do something about it? Why don't you form a party, for example? Why don't you run for a political seat? If there's something that you really dislike, why don't you change it? And there actually is a guy who did that. He hated something that most Japanese people hate, a lot of people hate. It's NHK. How come these guys for NHK keep knocking on my door and asking me for money? What the hell is that? Why is this tax being foisted on me? And how come these guys keep knocking on my door? So he started a political party against the NHK. I hope you remember that. So he's actually become quite prominent because it's a funny thing, you know, he felt that strongly about it. He actually used to work at NHK. And to start a political movement here is pretty difficult, but it all starts with education. It all starts with being involved and engaged. I think the Tokyo Metropolitan Administration has done a better job at that, engaging with the people. I think the national government has been less good at it. One of the reasons why the prime minister didn't go down to Hiroshima to help the LDP with that election was because they believed that diminishing it as a political issue meant less people would go, not highlighting it as a controversy, just kind of keeping it quiet, letting people. So as a result, the voter registration, the voting participation in Hiroshima was very low, probably around 42 or 43%. And they still lost. So usually when the votership is low, the LDP does better than the opposition party, but that didn't work this time. But yeah, I think a lot of it is just disenchantment with the political process. I like Konotaro because he's young and he's vibrant, and I think he'll bring new ideas. I think under that administration, you would see a lot of change, and he would, you know, he's very savvy with social media as well. He's already held 3 ministerial portfolios. Yeah, things, you know, that's the wonderful thing about Japan is that things don't change. Things don't change. You get sick and tired of it, and all of a sudden, things change. It could happen here as well. I'm very hopeful.
I have a question. I'd like comments or perspectives on the whole Gon fiasco and what are the political, if any, ramifications of what's going on with Gon and the associates and the other trials involved with that whole situation.
I'd open the room for that. If you have a carpet big enough, just go ahead and sweep it under there. But anybody else have any comments on that? It's actually a nasty, disgusting story. It's kind of like the Olympus story that we're all pretty familiar with. It's the same thing that's happened before. They regroup, they circle the wagons, they diminish the people who are saying something, you know, the internal whistleblowers, like Ravi Pasi, who was the general counsel at Nissan, who was just assassinated inside the company. He had to leave the country. I mean, he was just treated so brutally, just because he was trying to do his job. So there's a lot of nastiness that goes on in Japanese companies. In fact, this isn't a comment about, you know, Japan being bad per se, but you know, the amount of crime in Japan is very low, but there's still crime that occurs. It's not violent crime, but most of the crime that does occur, it occurs in companies. It's this corporate kind of crime. That's where the vast majority of crime occurs in Japan. So it's not something that actually involves the police. Most likely it involves the public prosecutors. But there's a tremendous lot of crime and dirtiness that goes on in Japanese business. I think we're all somewhat aware of that, but it's just not as prominent or as noteworthy as somebody getting knifed or somebody getting killed or somebody jumping out of a building. But I think, you know, it's a real morass there.
Are there political ramifications involved?
If the story came out, if the true story came out, yes, there would be. So there's going to be a lot of energy spent so that it doesn't. So usually what happens is some of the key players, they call in sick, or they go to the hospital, or they kill themselves or something like that. And then everything is, you know, all of the blame is heaped on them, and then the story kind of goes away. We've seen that over and over again. So once it starts getting close and they've identified some people who are really the central players, frequently that happens. I think the central players in the Nissan case is actually a foreigner. So he's unlikely to disappear into a hospital or to kill himself or to do something that the typical Japanese way of, just dodging these issues happens. So probably it's just going to be smothered. It's going to go on and on. Gon will never stand trial. He'll never come back to Japan. It'll just be one of those black eyes that they try and forget.
Any other questions? Any other opinions, comments?
Sakura-san, did you want to talk about your issue that I'm sorry I cut you off on earlier in the conversation?
Yes, hi, how are you, Timothy and Maya? And thank you so much for holding this very informative room. I'm a Japanese American living in the United States, and I am more than likely going to move to Japan to go live with in a friend's house in about a year, maybe under a year. And I just wanted to, I do follow Japanese politics a little bit. I know that they have a new prime minister now, Suga. So I just wanted to ask you two questions in relation to Suga, and I know that he's a little bit more liberal according to the Japan Times than Abe was. And I would like to ask you a question about immigration policy and if Japan is going to let up on the amount of foreign people that they allow to come into their country and work and live there, either permanently or semi-permanently. And my second question is on the XRP Ripple Bitcoin or crypto coin that's being kind of advertised, I want to say, by SBI Holdings. If you have any comments on that and why that is happening, why XRP is so prevalent in Japan. Thank you. I'm finished.
Thank you. I can't comment on the cryptocurrency. That's not my area. It probably has some political inflections, although I'm not very plugged into that. So maybe somebody else has some comments on that. With regard to immigration, though, the Japanese just really would prefer that the foreigners don't come in. They're a bother. They take more time. You have to explain things, and they still do it wrong. It is a pain in the neck. But for for political and financial reasons, we need to accept foreign capital and foreign companies to come here and do business. They do add value. So when you have a visa to come into Japan, it's not your visa issue. You're Japanese, so you can come to Japan at any time. But for any other person that's traveling to Japan, if you're not a tourist, come here on a tourist visa, and you stay for your 90 days, and it can be extended once without too much of a hassle. But after that, please go. Spend your money here. Tourism is great in Japan because it's kind of like free money. You have to come in. You're not taking money from the economy. You're actually putting money into the economy by spending. But you can't work. If you work, there are very stringent repercussions for that. And otherwise, there are about 6 other classifications for visas. All of them are based on the presumption that you are bringing something of value to the Japanese country. You're bringing something that we don't have, or you're supplementing. But when you're finished doing that, maybe you get married, maybe you transition to a permanent resident. It used to be very difficult to do that. It's a lot easier nowadays. But there is a recognition that Japan, with the aging society, and particularly now with the drive to close the supply chain and to diminish the reliance on having all the work, the labor being done in low-cost countries is coming back to haunt them. They do need workers, and not everything can be done by robotics. I think you will gradually see a change in the acceptance and the attitude towards foreigners, but it is slow. You just go out into the country just a little bit, even in Tokyo, and you talk to the person at the convenience store, and he's looking at you like he's never seen anybody before you, and you ask for a different plastic bag, and all he wants to do is give you another set of chopsticks. This sort of thing happens all the time. I mean, the discomfort of accepting foreigners, it's not just in immigration, it's also in marriage. You've married to a foreigner, and you're having a kid, and the kid has dual nationality, and is he circumcised, and what is circumcision, and oh my God, bringing these foreign techniques into it's huge. So yeah, there's a lot that more that could be done, and I think Japan, as reluctant as it is, probably has to face up to it. That in order to get the work and the technology, like Evan was saying, the 4,000 people they need those kinds of people, the people with technical skills, to drive what the digital agency is driving for, and what companies need. It's just there's a huge gap. So how are you going to fill it? The best and the easiest and quickest way to do that is allowing foreign technical workers in. So that's a long answer. I don't know if it's spot on.
Thank you.
Hi, Kaku, are you second generation or third generation?
I am Gonza. I'm 5th generation. So my family's been here a really long time. Yes.
Okay, got it. So one step is go to Japanese council to see if there's what may be the easiest way to apply. And if you get the visa, you can come to Japan. Otherwise, you may not be able to. Right.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate all your answers.
Right.
And your cat's going to be a problem.
Oh, the cat already resides in Japan. This is a Japanese grumpy cat, Koyuki. I'm a huge fan. I have all of her photos.
Thank you.
Well, if there are no other comments or questions, I would like to proceed with closing the room.
What a huge room. Thank you very much, everybody, for hanging out, for sticking with us. This room is growing every week, and it's great to see everybody and to address these issues. They're kind of the same issues every time. It's just that the texture changes. I'm really gratified that people are that interested in it.
Well, we've got James. James, would you like to chime in? Yeah.
Oh yeah, hi. I'm Korean, so I was a little hesitant to join, but since it was about to close, I wanted to jump in. I missed most of the conversation. Unfortunately, I only joined about 10, 15 minutes ago, so I think I missed everything. But several things I would love to hear about. Obviously, I would love to hear what has been said, but I don't think I can ask that. Perhaps if you can just mix in what you've said before into mine about the issues, about the topics I want to ask about.
Yes, James, sorry to cut you. Well, this conversation is being recorded, and it will be uploaded on the Japan Expert Insights.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
Yes, site, so you can listen to it later. But
okay.
Yes, if you have any questions at the moment relevant to
Great.
the part which you have heard so far,
Great.
please do. Yes.
Yes, I've heard about how the things not looking so optimistic, but I was wondering because that's exactly what Korean public is going through, trying to reform what has not been changing for 70 years since the independence. It's really taking a lot of energy and effort from the people for decades and decades to try to change things. And I'm wondering how it is in Japan, because I think it would be similar, because there are very limited repetitive ways the system keeps itself, and that's as you mentioned, the media, the corporate media, and the prosecutors in Korea. So that's the key area people are trying to change, so that politics can change. And I'm wondering how that's if that story is kind of similar in Japan, because the reason it is the media and the prosecution is because it's quite obvious why media is the one of the main problem, because no new politicians can arise because media sets the agenda. Media sets who will join the political scene, and the prosecution is because they choose who the power wants to shut down. Like, like what you mentioned, or what's been mentioned about what's going on in the corporate world, where things are not, and they need to scapegoat someone, witch hunt someone to so that the system can can um, um, defend itself. So yeah, so yeah, I'm wondering if there's any awareness or effort to change the process. I would have to add about why it is the prosecution. One more thing about it, because it's not a problem in most of the world, but it's a problem in Korea because the prosecution system has remained from what it was since the Japanese rule, where they have two key powers, which is the not only the prosecution power, but the investigation power. So police don't have that. Prosecution they have the only right to prosecute someone to the juries. So people can think, oh, okay,
James,
yeah,
it's a little bit off topic, and we're just in the middle of trying to wrap up the room. So maybe next week, sign in at 8 o'clock, see how things are flowing, and yeah, thanks.
Okay, sorry, I joined too late.
Thank you. Well, with this, I would like to close the room. So thank you very much, Timothy. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming and joining the conversation. Once again, this conversation has been recorded. It will be uploaded on the Japan Expert Insights site. And also, if you would like to get some more information, details about politics and what is going on in this field, you can visit Timothy Langley's company's homepage, Langley Esquire. So they've got a newsletter there, which also gives you insights into public policy, public affairs, and politics. Also, Gary, so last time you talked about the importance of education and that you would like to have a room discussion on it as well. And we're planning to have one later. So please stick with us. The announcement about the room will be out maybe next week. So thank you very much for suggesting the topic. We're going to do it. And well, thank you very much, everybody. So Timothy, if you would like to say a few words in conclusion, please go ahead.
Great, thank you. Yes, Jerry, you mentioned education in our last conversation. It's a little bit off of Japanese politics, but it does have lots of connotations there, and it's not my particular area, but I think I would love to set up a room and probably get you involved in that, because I understand you're an educator and you've got a lot of information on that too. So maybe setting up a different room. We tried to do a 1-2 punch. If you recall, we did Japanese politics, and then we did espionage in Japan. We did our Japanese politics 8 o'clock, and then we started the espionage in Japan room at 9 o'clock. That didn't work very well because there's too much bleeding. And today we've almost gone 2 hours. So this is a 1 hour room, scheduled to be a 1 hour room, but we just really got into a lot of different issues. So please work with Maya. I think there's a lot of people that are interested in that part of it, but not to diminish it at all, but it's just just off my radar too much to be able to speak with any authority on it. Thanks, Gary, for sticking with us.
Sure, I'll work towards that and do what I can to contribute.
Thank you very much. Definitely, I'll join. Thank you, everybody. We had a great room. A lot stuck around and contributed. Look forward to seeing you again every Sunday at 8 o'clock. Thank you again, Maya, for hosting.
Thank you. With this, I'll say, well, have a great day, everybody, and hope to see you next week.
Bye.
Thank you. Arigatou gozaimashita.
Thank you, Maya.
See you soon.
See you soon. Bye.
Thank you, Timothy, Maya. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.